Hi there, and welcome to my presentation on sustainable eating. I'm super happy to explain what sustainable diets are today. It's a true passion of mine to garden and grow my own food, so I hope that you guys learn a lot. Just as a little bit of background, my name is Amy Adams. I am a registered dietitian and a graduate student at Framingham State University. We have a few objectives that we'll go over today. The first is to identify problems in our food system, which you guys will learn there are many problems to address. The next is that we'll explain the components of what makes a diet sustainable. And then the last is that we'll be applying knowledge by listing ways that registered dietitians can promote sustainability. All right, so the first thing we'll tackle is soil health, which is a really large concern in the agricultural world today. So, as a little bit of background, soil stores water, provides resilience to drought, and sequesters carbon. Carbon is really important for all living creatures, especially plants. So, plants take in carbon dioxide and convert it to energy for growth. We use it or plants rather, use it for photosynthesis. When the plant dies, that carbon dioxide is given off from the decomposition of the plant. And the role of carbon in plants is to essentially foster healthier and more productive growth. So you can imagine that the soil's ability to sequester carbon is really important. One of our biggest threats to the food supply currently is the loss of topsoil. So, topsoil is where you'll find all those healthy nutrients, and the topsoil really helps to hold in moisture and protect the plant and foster that growth. Looking at conventional farming, so for the purposes of this presentation, conventional farming you can think of as like large agricultural farming. You can use any kind of like synthetic pesticides, herbicides, even like sewage sludge, irrigation, and different things like that to grow crops. Whereas unconventional farming or more like organic farming utilizes nature and all different kinds of species of plants or animals to help the plant symbiotically grow naturally. So, with conventional farming, they use things like monocropping, which we'll get to in a little bit. It's essentially just growing a large amount of one kind of crop on a specific plot of land. The reason for this is to really grow those cheaper crops that are highly productive and can make a farmer a lot of money, whether it's a subsidized crop or just something that's used in everyday life. So, the perfect example of this would be corn growth. Next, we have tilling. So, conventional farming uses a lot of tilling, and tilling is essentially just scraping up the ground and really getting underneath the soil so that you can plant your seeds more efficiently. If you've ever tried a non-tilling method, it's really hard to get into the soil and penetrate the seeds into the ground. So you'll definitely realize that using a non-tilling method. So the reason why tilling is so awful for soil health is because it really opens up and makes the soil essentially more vulnerable. So it opens up and aggregates that were protected within the soil. So it's really like opening up that ecosystem and the bacteria in there and those microorganisms that help plants to really grip into the soil and grow naturally. It decomposes that bacteria. So over time, the soil really loses its fertility. Other things that conventional farming uses is pesticides and fertilizers. So that's obviously something that can negatively affect our soil's ecosystem and nutrients. It's not something found in nature typically, and our soil just does not like those things. We'll get to this next bullet point on the next slide. But essentially, I wanted to talk about the difference between an untouched prairie field and a conventional farmland. So with the untouched prairie field, the soil is thick and dark, and there's feet feet of carbon and other kinds of nutrients that really help the plant grow. Whereas with the conventional farmland, it's very there's like a thick crust of clay, and it's just not fertile, which you'll see on the next page. And overall, the farm field's ability on that conventional farmland to retain water is decreasing at a rapid rate due to sediment loss. So we want water to be able to be retained within the ground to help those plants grow, and that's rapidly decreasing. Overall, this has cost globally a large amount of money, but in the United States, the loss of soil health or fertile soil has cost the United States $37.6 billion every year. And over the past 150 years, we've actually lost 50% of our fertile soil. In Iowa specifically, where they grow a lot of our crops that we use in everyday life, the soil that is able to grow food is dying at a 10 times faster rate than it is regenerating. So that's a really large concern. All right, so we talked about that untouched prairie field versus the conventional farmland. So on the left, you guys can see that there's a lot, it's really biodiverse. There's different kinds of crops there, and all those crops are like feeding off of each other and giving each other different kinds of nutrients to help foster growth. Whereas on the right-hand side, you guys can see that the conventional farmland, it's really over-tilled and processed. On the right-hand corner, you can see how that's really like desolate. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, that is an extreme example where essentially the soil is like compacted and crusted and really has like a lot of clay in it. And that is not fertile soil. Okay, so why should we care about this? So, looking at human growth and our population, we really have an issue here with both hunger and obesity. So, looking at the overall imbalance, so the imbalance in food access has been expanding over the past decade. And we actually currently have 2.1 billion obese and overweight humans on planet Earth. And 815 million humans are hungry. So there's a really large gap and imbalance. And it really comes down to the methods in which we grow food and the accessibility of all people everywhere to have food. So, with food production, the world food system can actually produce today a little less than 2,870 calories per person per day. And the average actual per capita calorie requirement is 2,550 calories. So essentially, that's saying that we produce way more food than every single individual on planet Earth needs to survive and maintain their current body weight. So that's a huge misconception because a lot of times people think, well, if there's people that are hungry in this world, well, why can't we just, produce a large amount of food at a rapid pace, which essentially is conventional farming, and feed everyone? So there's really that paradox of having those people who, are overweight or not starving, and then those malnourished, hungry people. And we can't necessarily just solve that issue by producing more food. Most notably and concerning is the food waste in this country. So, and globally. So, 1/3 of global food production is lost, destroyed, or wasted during preservation, processing, distribution, or consumption. One thing that I find probably the most disturbing is the way in which before produce is shipped off to the grocery store, there will be that process where farmers and producers can kind of look at imperfect produce. So, like perhaps an apple that has a bruise on it, or like a pepper that just looks a little bit quote unquote weird. So they can actually just discard those fruits and vegetables because they're not appealing to the general public. So some of the food that is grown doesn't even reach the shelves and is just discarded right away due to the fact that it looks a little bit ugly or imperfect. All right. So, what are the problems in our global food system? Just to expand a little bit more on that. So, we talked about monocropping. So, conventional agriculture in general prioritizes consistency and productivity over biodiversity. So, biodiversity is very important. It helps guard our food system from diseases and other threats. So when you have just one kind of crop that's highly productive and can make a lot of money, that is not helping the soil health, and then it's really doing nothing for disease prevention or any kind of other threats that nature can throw at us. Looking at another issue, so policies. So during the Great Depression, the United States subsidized 5 crops. You can see them listed here. It's corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, and rice. So even though we are out of that era, the United States still continues to subsidize those crops. So meaning that farmers receive more of a reimbursement for growing those crops than if they were to grow like fruit or vegetable crops. And most surprisingly, most of the US grown corn and soybeans are actually used to make fuel for our cars. So they don't even necessarily add anything to the food system. Speaking of cars and fuel, our reliance on fossil fuel is equally as problematic, as well as using things like harmful fertilizers and inefficient irrigation systems really increase our food insecurity overall. Last, looking at federal programs. So we have federal programs like SNAP benefits, or most commonly called food stamps in our country, that help to bring hopefully healthful food to underprivileged people. So not enough farmers markets really work with federal programs like SNAP. There has been some more recent efforts to allow SNAP benefits for places like farmers markets that don't use that conventional farming. But there really needs to be more expansion of that overall. Okay, so we're talking about sustainability. So, what is a sustainable diet? So, the definition of a sustainable diet is a diet with low environmental impact that contributes to food and nutrition security and to healthy life for present and future generations. A sustainable diet is protective in that it respects the biodiversity of nature and protects our ecosystem overall. It's culturally acceptable, so it's accessible and economically fair and affordable for all people. And most importantly, for us dietitians, it's nutritionally adequate. So it focuses not only on meeting those macronutrients, especially like those carbohydrates, but it also focuses on our micronutrient needs as well. So ensuring that we get enough fruits and vegetables that have those great vitamins and minerals in our diet. And last, it's safe and healthy. So it's safe for us while still optimizing natural and human resources. It's really thinking of the overall picture and looking at growth long term. Speaking of benefits for the body, so choosing more nutritious foods that have the least impact on our environment is super important and a main benefit of the sustainable diet. Um, the kinds of crops that we would be focused on, so most notably our fruits and our vegetables, those are crops that are low in calories and high in those good nutrients that we just talked about. And last but not least, it's protective. So it's based on the Mediterranean diet, which we'll get into on the next slide, which has been shown through research to be one of the most beneficial diets out there. So it's really high in things like phytonutrients and antioxidants, which help to protect the body from certain things like cancer, heart disease, etc. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with the left-hand side of this picture. So this is the old and really like outdated food pyramid, I guess you could say. So looking at that food pyramid, the idea is that the items on the bottom, so those fruits and those vegetables, are things that you want to be consuming more regularly, and then working all the way to the top where we have those donuts and red meat and cakes and things like that. Those are the things that you want to eat less of or avoid. And then looking at the right hand side, where it's essentially just tipped upside down, this is what sustainable eating looks like. So it's focusing on the bottom half of the pyramid, which has the lowest impact on our environment and the human body, versus the top half of the pyramid, which has the highest impact on both the environment and it's most detrimental to the human body. All right, and going off of environmental impacts, so a sustainable diet is beneficial because for the planet and the human body, because foods with the greatest negative impact are also those that are healthiest for human health. So looking at, those fruits and vegetables, those are the things that have the lowest impact on our ecosystem and are the most beneficial for our health. Three of the most highly negative, impactful foods on the ecosystem are sugar, dairy, and red meat, most notably produced in industrial animal operations. If you were to look at the impression that each different kind of food has on the ecosystem, a good example would be that 2 pounds of vegetables result in an ecological footprint of only 2 square meters of land, but 2 pounds of red meat impacts 54 square meters of land. So there's that large discrepancy where red meat is more impactful on our ecosystem than fruits and vegetables. And just to delve into that a little bit more, so looking at carbon footprint. So this is a phrase that's kind of thrown around a lot more recently. So what is carbon footprint? So it's the estimation of how a production method, most notably like farming and different things like that, affect the climate by measuring the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So things like methane, carbon dioxide, and certain things like that. So if you look over to the left-hand side, I have this little chart here. So this goes over the amount of in grams of CO2 produced per 1 kilogram of food. So you can see that beef has the largest impact and emits the most carbon dioxide at a little bit less than 20,000 grams. Whereas if you go down the line, fish is the next most impactful, then poultry, beans and dried fruit, and then last but not least, vegetables and seasonal fruits, which have the least amount of impact on our CO2 emissions. Okay, so it can seem like at this point the future is a little bit bleak for us, but there are solutions. So, the first solution would be to focus on farmers and food producers. So, we really need to rethink the types of meat and other animal products that we raise and eat. We mostly want to focus on breeds that are hardy and resistant to disease. And we really want to support these farmers by not only respecting them as as workers and part of our global food system, but we really want to advocate for them when it comes to things like policies, which is the last bullet point on this slide. So we really want to focus on policies that shift the emphasis in food and agricultural aspects from high volumes of a few crops to greater diversity of nutrient crops, for sure. And then focusing on the consumer, so you and I. So we really need to refine our consumption of not only animal products, but focus on quality, health, sustainability, and also humane treatment. So, what are our barriers to improving our food system? So, first and foremost, consumers, you and I, are influenced by marketing. So, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a marketing campaign to promote fruits and vegetables. It's most notably marketing toward those desserts and kind of more junkier foods. Like our best example would be cereal and things like that versus our nutrient dense fruits and vegetables. Government policies are another barrier. So, what are we subsidizing? And really, what is the impact that our government policies are having on how farmers are producing crops? We also want to try to get people excited about sustainability in agriculture. I know it's not a very sexy topic, but it's something that we really need to think about in terms of long-term growth and sustainability for the planet. And then last, we have to focus on farmers' perception of regenerative agriculture and really biodynamic farming. So, most farmers, rightfully so, are kind of focused on profit and what they can do to make money because they also have families and obviously need money for that. So, what can we do to help shift, the farmers' focus on like producing things really quickly at a high profitable rate versus thinking more in terms of long-term effects. So yes, we might get a quick turnaround and a quick profit from monocropping and growing, only corn. But if that monocropping is going to lead to soil degradation, then are we even going to have a plot of land, 5 or 10 years down the road to grow crops on? So, really focusing more on long-term growth versus short-term profit. All right, so what is our role as registered dietitians? So, for sustainability, we really want to integrate sustainability into our education and counseling by discussing how our food choices impact health outcomes and also the environment. We want to promote different diets that are sustainable for the planet and for the body. So, focusing on diets like the Mediterranean diet or using that double food pyramid to explain what people should be eating and how what they're eating impacts our environment. We also want to discuss the mental, economic, and physical impact of growing your own food. So not only, can it be cheaper in the long run buying seed versus going to the grocery store, and how we can yield more fruits and vegetables in that way, but it's also good for the body physically and mentally as well. And then last, we want to support legislation which promotes sustainability and helps our farmers. Okay, so thank you guys so much for listening today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and email me at any time. I really appreciate you. And here are my references that I used in creating this presentation. Thank you and have a great day.